My grandmother passed away on a Tuesday morning in November. By Thursday, her lawyer called the entire family into his office. There were 4 sealed envelopes on the table. He said each one would be opened in order. He said each one contained something the family needed to hear. What none of them knew was that I already knew everything, because Eleanor had told me herself, 3 months before she died. My name is Claire Whitfield. I'm 34 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the person in the room that the Whitfield family wished wasn't there. Not openly. The Whitfields were too old money Savannah for anything as crude as open hostility. It was subtler than that, the kind of exclusion that happens in small, deniable increments. The family photographs where I was positioned slightly apart from the group. The holiday dinners where the conversation turned to shared memories I had no part of. The way Richard, my uncle, had a habit of referring to family decisions as matters for the real Whitfields, always with a slight pause before real, always with his eyes sliding just past me. I was adopted at age 2. That was the fact that defined everything in their eyes. Not my 20 years of living in that house, not my grandmother's love, not the Whitfield name on my driver's license and my college diploma and my architecture firm's letterhead. I was adopted. Therefore, I was conditional. Therefore, I was, in some fundamental and never quite spoken way, temporary. Eleanor Whitfield, my grandmother, the woman who had brought me into this family and fought for my place in it every day for 32 years, was the only exception. She was the one who had insisted on the adoption over Richard's objections. She was the one who had sat with me through every difficult conversation, every moment of doubt, every occasion when the weight of being the outsider felt heavier than I could carry. She was the one who had looked at me on the morning of my college graduation and said with the complete certainty of someone who has decided something permanently, "You are mine, Claire. Don't ever let them make you forget that." She died on a Tuesday morning in November, at 84 years old, in the bedroom of the Whitfield house on Abercorn Street where she had lived for 60 years. I was with her. I had been with her every day for the last 3 months. That detail matters. Remember it. The Whitfield estate was, by any reasonable measure, significant. Eleanor's late husband, my grandfather, who died before I was adopted, had built a moderately successful commercial real estate business in Savannah over 4 decades. Eleanor had managed and grown those assets with the quiet confidence of a woman who understood money better than anyone around her realized. By the time of her death, the estate included the Abercorn Street property, 3 commercial buildings in the historic district, a portfolio of investments and liquid assets. Total value, as Howard Mills, Eleanor's attorney of 40 years, would confirm at the Thursday meeting, approximately $4.7 million. Richard had been calculating his share of that number for years. I knew this because Richard was not as subtle as he believed himself to be, and because Eleanor had told me, with the dry clarity she brought to everything, exactly what her eldest son thought he was entitled to. "Richard has been waiting for me to die since your grandfather passed," she had said once, without particular bitterness, just the observation of a woman who has accepted an uncomfortable truth. "He's going to be very surprised." I had asked her what she meant. She had smiled, that particular small smile she used when she knew something you didn't, and said, "You'll understand on Thursday." The call from Howard Mills came Wednesday afternoon. He had a calm, measured voice, the voice of a man who has delivered difficult news so many times that he has learned to carry it without letting it weigh on him. He informed me that Eleanor's will would be read Thursday morning at 10 o'clock at his office on Bull Street, and that my presence was required. Required. Not requested. Required. I noted the word. Richard called me an hour later. He was cordial in the way he was always cordial when he wanted something, surface warmth over a substrate of calculation. "Claire," he said, "Howard tells me you're coming Thursday." "Yes," I said. Good. A pause that lasted slightly too long. "You know, Eleanor always spoke so warmly of you. Whatever she's left you, I'm sure it's something meaningful. Sentimental, probably. Something personal." He was telling me, as gently as a man like Richard was capable of, what category he had placed me in. Sentimental. Personal. A piece of jewelry, perhaps. A piece of furniture. Something appropriate for the adopted girl who had been graciously included in the family. "I'm sure you're right," I said pleasantly. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment, a small, well-designed space in the Victorian district that I had renovated myself, and looked at the framed photograph on my bookshelf. Eleanor and me, taken 3 years ago on her back porch, both of us laughing at something I no longer remembered. Her hand on my arm. I thought about the last conversation we'd had, the real one, 3 months before she died, when she had told me everything. All of it. The 4 envelopes. What each one contained. What she had spent 30 years waiting to say. And why she had chosen to say it this way, in a room full of people who had spent decades making me feel like a guest in my own family, with a lawyer present and everything documented and no possibility of revision or denial. Eleanor Whitfield had been a patient woman. But she had also, I was only now fully understanding, been a precise one. Thursday was going to be a very specific kind of morning. I was ready for it. Howard Mills's office was on Bull Street, a narrow, high-ceilinged space in a restored antebellum building that smelled like old paper and lemon polish, and the particular mustiness of a place where serious things had been decided for a very long time. I arrived at 9:55. Richard was already there, seated at the far end of the conference table with the proprietary ease of a man who considers himself the natural center of any room he enters. He was wearing a blazer I recognized, the navy one he reserved for occasions he considered important. Patricia sat beside him, her reading glasses already on though there was nothing yet to read, her handbag held in her lap with the tight grip of someone bracing for impact she doesn't quite anticipate. Derek was at the window, ostensibly looking at the street below. He turned when I entered and gave me the smile he always gave me, practiced, warm on the surface, measuring underneath.
"Claire," he said.
"Good to see you." "Derek," I said. I sat at the opposite end of the table from Richard. Howard Mills entered precisely at 10, carrying a leather portfolio and a wooden box I hadn't expected, flat, about the size of a shoebox, with a small brass latch. He set both on the table, greeted everyone by name, and sat down. He opened the portfolio. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to explain the format of this morning. Eleanor was very specific about her instructions, and I will be following them exactly." He gestured to the wooden box. Inside this box are 4 sealed envelopes, numbered 1 through 4. Each contains a document Eleanor prepared personally, reviewed with me, and had notarized. They are to be opened in order. No envelope is to be opened until the contents of the previous one have been read aloud and acknowledged by everyone present. Richard shifted slightly in his chair. "Is this really necessary?" The theatrical presentation. Howard looked at him with the calm patience of a man who has been dealing with difficult people for 40 years. "Eleanor's instructions were explicit, Richard. Shall we proceed?" Richard said nothing further. Howard opened the box. Envelope 1. Howard broke the seal carefully and removed a single folded page. He unfolded it, cleared his throat, and read. Eleanor's voice came through the language. I could hear it, the precise cadence of a woman who chose every word deliberately. "To my family, I have spent considerable time deciding how to say what needs to be said. I have concluded that clarity is kinder than diplomacy at this stage, so I will be direct. This first envelope concerns the Abercorn Street property." Richard straightened almost imperceptibly. The house. His assumption, I knew, was that it would go to him as the eldest, a matter of what he considered natural order. Howard continued reading. "The Abercorn Street property, including all furnishings and contents, is to be transferred in full to Claire and Whitfield. The reasoning is simple. Claire is the only member of this family who visited me consistently, without agenda, in the last 3 years of my life. She sat with me through my illness not because she expected something in return, but because she loved me. A home should go to the person who treated it as one." The room was very quiet. Richard's face had gone through several colors in the span of 10 seconds. He settled on a particular shade of controlled red that I recognized as the color of a man suppressing something he knows he cannot say in front of a lawyer. Patricia made a small sound, not quite a word, something between protest and disbelief. Derek was very still at the window. "Shall I continue?" Howard said. Nobody objected. Envelope 2. Howard broke the second seal. This page was slightly longer. "This envelope concerns my son Richard." Richard's jaw tightened. Richard has managed the expectation of inheriting the Whitfield commercial properties for approximately 20 years. I am aware of this because Richard is not subtle, and because the conversations he has had with his attorney about the anticipated inheritance, conversations he believed were private, were not entirely private. "Howard, please confirm for the record." Howard looked up. "Eleanor provided me with documentation of those conversations 18 months ago," he said evenly. "I have reviewed them. They are part of the estate record." Richard went completely still. In those conversations, Howard continued reading. Richard discussed strategies for liquidating the commercial properties immediately upon inheritance, restructuring the proceeds through a holding company, and, most relevantly, excluding Claire from any distribution on the grounds that her adoption could be legally characterized as non-binding given a technicality in the original documentation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Richard retained an attorney to research this possibility 4 years ago. He did not tell me. He did not tell Claire. He told Derek, who did not tell me either, a fact I note for the record without additional comment at this stage. Derek, still at the window, did not turn around. "The commercial properties will not be going to Richard. They will be liquidated by the estate and the proceeds distributed as directed in Envelope 4. Richard will receive the sum of $1, which I understand is the legal minimum required to demonstrate intent rather than oversight. I want to be clear that this is intentional and not an oversight." Patricia inhaled sharply. Richard stood up. "This is," he started. "Richard." Howard's voice was quiet and entirely firm.
"Sit down."
"We are not finished." A long moment. Richard sat down. Envelope 3. I had known this one was coming. Eleanor had told me. Even knowing, I found myself holding very still as Howard broke the seal. "This envelope concerns my daughter Patricia and my grandson Derek." Patricia's hands tightened on her handbag. Patricia has spent the better part of 2 decades telling anyone who would listen that Claire's adoption was a mistake, that I was motivated by grief after losing my youngest daughter, and was not thinking clearly. Patricia has said this to neighbors, to church acquaintances, to her own children. She said it to Claire's face once, when Claire was 17 years old, and she believed I didn't know. Patricia's face had gone white. I knew. I have always known most of what happens in this family because people consistently underestimate quiet women. Patricia will receive the jewelry she has always coveted, specifically the pearl set that belonged to her grandmother. Nothing else. Howard paused, then continued. Derek is addressed separately because his situation is more specific. 3 years ago, Derek approached Claire privately and asked her to co-sign a business loan he could not obtain independently. Claire, who is a more generous person than this family has deserved, agreed. Derek received $85,000 through that arrangement. He has repaid approximately $12,000. The estate will recover the remaining $73,000 from Derek's share before any distribution. Derek's remaining inheritance will be whatever balance exists after that recovery. I anticipate this will be a small number. Derek turned from the window for the first time. His expression was the expression of a man who has just understood that the person he thought was the weakest in the room had been watching him the entire time. The room was silent for a long moment after Howard finished the 3rd envelope. Richard was looking at the table. Patricia was looking at her hands. Derek was looking at nothing in particular with the focused blankness of someone processing something too large to immediately absorb. None of them were looking at me. I looked at the wooden box on Howard's desk. 1 envelope remaining. Shall we proceed to envelope 4? Howard said. His voice was professionally neutral. But I had been watching him carefully all morning and I saw, just briefly, just for a moment, something in his expression that looked very much like satisfaction. Eleanor had chosen her lawyer well. Yes, I said. Howard reached for the final envelope. Howard held the 4th envelope in both hands for a moment before setting it on the table. Before I open this, he said, Eleanor asked me to say something directly. Not from the document, from me, as someone who knew her for 40 years. He looked around the table slowly. Eleanor Whitfield was the most deliberate person I have ever represented. Nothing in this room today is accidental. Nothing is impulsive. She has been building toward this morning for a very long time. I want everyone to understand that before we proceed. Richard made a sound that was almost a laugh. Howard, with respect. Richard. Howard's voice carried the particular weight of a man who has run out of patience and is no longer concealing it. I have been your mother's attorney since before you were running that real estate business into the ground in 1987. I have earned the right to finish a sentence. Richard closed his mouth. Howard set the envelope down and looked at me.
Claire, he said.
This one is primarily for you. Eleanor wanted you to hear it last after everything else, because she felt the context mattered. Do you understand? Yes, I said. He broke the seal. The fourth document was longer than the others, 6 pages in Eleanor's handwriting, transcribed by Howard into formal language, but unmistakably hers in every sentence. He began reading. To Claire. What follows is the truth I should have told you 20 years ago. I did not tell you then because I was afraid, not of you, but of what the telling would require of me. I have spent considerable time being ashamed of that fear. This document is my attempt, late as it is, to repair the damage my silence caused. I was very still. You were told that you were adopted at age 2 following the death of your birth parents in a car accident. That is partially true. There was a car accident. Your mother did die in it. But your father did not die in that accident. Your father was alive. Your father, Claire, was my son. My youngest son, James Whitfield, who this family has not spoken of in 34 years. The room shifted. Not physically, nobody moved. But something changed in the quality of the air, the way air changes before a storm when the pressure drops suddenly and the world goes briefly, completely quiet. I had known this was coming. Eleanor had told me. Knowing did not make hearing it any easier. Howard continued. James was 22 years old when you were born. He was not married to your mother, a fact that Richard and Patricia considered a scandal of the first order and responded to accordingly. When your mother died and James was left alone with an infant daughter he was not equipped to raise, Richard and Patricia pressured him, systematically and without mercy, to relinquish custody. They told him it was for the child's good. They told him you would have a better life. What they actually wanted was for the embarrassment to disappear quietly. Patricia made a sound. Howard did not pause. James agreed, because he was 22 and grieving and his family had spent weeks dismantling his confidence until he had none left. He signed the relinquishment documents. He left Savannah. He has lived in Portland, Oregon for the last 31 years. He is a high school art teacher. He has never married. He has thought about you every day. Something moved through my chest, a sensation I didn't have an immediate name for. Not quite grief. Not quite joy. Something that contained both and was larger than either. I have been in contact with James throughout. He knows about you, Claire. He has followed your life from a distance, your education, your career, your firm. He did not reach out because he believed you deserved to choose whether to know him, not to have that choice made for you. That decision, that generosity toward a daughter he had never met, is the reason I am telling you this now. He deserved to be acknowledged. So did you. Howard set the pages down for a moment and looked at the room. Richard was gray. Not the controlled red of earlier, gray, the color of a man who has just understood the full scope of what he participated in 34 years ago and what it has cost everyone around him. Patricia was crying quietly. Not the performative tears she had deployed at Eleanor's funeral, something smaller and less controlled. Something that looked, for the first time in my experience of her, like genuine feeling. Derek was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Something that might have been, if I was reading it correctly, shame. Howard picked up the pages again. The remainder of the estate, after the property transfer to Claire, after the recovery of Derek's debt, after Patricia's jewelry, after Richard's dollar, consists of the liquidated commercial properties and the investment portfolio. Total value approximately $3.1 million after taxes and estate costs. This amount is to be placed in a trust managed by Howard Mills, with Claire as sole beneficiary. The trust has one condition. that Claire use whatever portion she chooses, if any, to make contact with James Whitfield. Not to forgive him. Forgiveness is hers to give or withhold as she sees fit. Simply to know him if she wants to. He has waited 34 years. I think that is long enough. Howard turned to the final page. There is one more thing. In the box beneath the envelopes, there is a letter. It is from James, written 6 months ago when I told him what I was planning. I have not read it. It is for Claire only. I ask that the rest of the family respect that boundary, though I acknowledge that requesting respect from people who have demonstrated so little of it is perhaps optimistic. Howard folded the document carefully. He reached into the wooden box and removed a plain white envelope from beneath the tray where the 4 numbered envelopes had rested. He slid it across the table to me. My name was written on the front in handwriting I had never seen before. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Richard said, very quietly, not the boardroom voice, not the family patriarch voice, just the voice of a tired 61-year-old man. I didn't know she was going to do this. No, I said. You didn't, Claire. Not today, Richard, I said. Not harshly, just clearly. Whatever you want to say, not today. He nodded, once, and looked back at the table. Patricia had stopped crying. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't fully categorize, somewhere between contrition and the habitual defensiveness of someone who has spent decades protecting a version of events that has just been publicly dismantled. The pearls, she said finally, very quietly. She knew I wanted them. She knew everything, I said. Patricia looked down. I picked up the white envelope, James Whitfield's letter, written 6 months ago to a daughter he had never met, and held it in both hands. It was light, a few pages at most. 34 years in an envelope that weighed almost nothing. Howard began gathering his documents. The meeting, by Eleanor's design, was concluded. There was nothing left for the family to argue over. The documents were notarized, the instructions explicit, the estate structured in a way that left no legal avenue for challenge that Howard had not already anticipated and closed. Eleanor had spent 30 years planning this morning. She had not left a single gap. I stood up, put the envelope carefully in my bag, and looked around the room one last time, at Richard, gray and diminished, at Patricia, clutching her handbag with both hands, at Derek, who still hadn't found anywhere comfortable to look. These people had been my family for 32 years. I understood them, finally and completely, in a way I never had before. And I understood something else too, something Eleanor had known and had tried, in her patient and precise way, to give me before she left. I was not the outsider in this family. I had never been the outsider. I was the one Eleanor had chosen to trust with the truth. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. I thanked Howard. I walked out of his office onto Bull Street into the Savannah morning. Live oaks and Spanish moss and the particular quality of November light in coastal Georgia, warm and golden and indifferent to everything that had just happened in the room behind me. I sat on a bench in Chippewa Square and took the envelope out of my bag. And I began to read. James Whitfield's letter was 4 pages long. He wrote the way people write when they have been composing something in their head for decades and have finally, with great care, committed it to paper. Every sentence felt considered. Nothing was wasted. There were no dramatic declarations, no requests for forgiveness, no attempts to explain away 34 years of absence in language that could make it smaller than it was. He simply told me who he was. He was 56 years old. He taught art at a public high school in Portland, Oregon, had been teaching there for 22 years. He lived alone in a small house with a garden he tended carefully and a dog named Harlow, who was 11 years old and arthritic, but still insisted on morning walks. He painted on weekends, watercolors mostly, landscapes of the Oregon coast. He had never remarried, never had other children. He wrote about my mother. Her name was Anna. She had been 20 years old when she died, a junior at SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design, studying illustration. He described her the way people describe someone they loved young and lost completely, with the particular precision of grief that has had decades to clarify itself into something bearable. Her laugh, the way she approached every problem, as if it were a design challenge. The specific shade of her eyes, which he said I had inherited, based on the photographs Eleanor had sent him over the years. He had photographs of me, 32 years of them. Eleanor had been sending them since I was 2 years old. I sat on that bench in Chippewa Square and read that page twice. My grandmother had been building a bridge for 34 years, quietly, methodically, without telling either of us, between a father who had lost his daughter and a daughter who didn't know her father existed. That was Eleanor Whitfield. That was exactly Eleanor Whitfield. Near the end of the letter, James wrote something I have returned to many times since. I want to be honest with you about something. I have rehearsed this letter in my head for years. Different versions, different approaches, different ways of making myself sound like less of a coward than I was at 22. I have decided to stop rehearsing and just tell you the truth. I was afraid. Your grandmother's family was formidable, and I was young, and I had just lost your mother, and I did not have the strength to fight for you the way you deserve to be fought for. I have lived with that failure every day since. I am not asking you to absolve me of it. I am just asking if you're willing for the chance to know you. Not to be your father. That is not something I have earned, and I understand that. Just to know the person you have become. Eleanor tells me you are remarkable. But Eleanor always told me that from the very beginning, so I'm not sure I can trust her objectivity. That last sentence, that small, careful attempt at lightness at the end of a letter that had cost him everything to write, was what broke me open finally, sitting on that bench in the November sun. Not dramatically. Not the way grief announces itself in movies. Just quietly, the way things release when they have been held too long. I sat there for a while and let it happen. I called Howard Mills from the square. He answered immediately. I suspected he had been waiting. The letter, I said. Does James know about today? Does he know what Eleanor did? He knows the general structure, Howard said carefully. Eleanor told him she was planning to tell you the truth. He didn't know the specifics, the other envelopes, the family. Just that you would know about him after this morning. Does he know I've read his letter? Not yet, Howard said. I looked at the live oaks overhead, the Spanish moss moving slightly in the coastal breeze, that specific Savannah stillness that exists between the city and the water. Howard, I said, does Eleanor's documentation include a phone number for James? A pause. Then, with something warm in his professional voice, it does. I'll text it to you now. I did not call James that day. I want to be honest about that. There is a version of this story where I called him from the bench in Chippewa Square, where we spoke for the first time with the Savannah light coming through the live oaks, and it was immediately and perfectly healing. That version is a better story in the conventional sense. But it isn't what happened. What happened is that I went home to my apartment in the Victorian district and sat with everything for 3 days. Not avoiding it, processing it. There is a difference, and it matters. I had learned, in one morning, that the family narrative I had been given about myself was false. That I was not adopted in the conventional sense. I was separated from a living parent by people who found his existence inconvenient. That my grandmother had known this and carried it for 34 years and had spent that time building the conditions for the truth to finally emerge safely. That was not a small thing to absorb. I called my closest friend, a woman named Diane who had known me since college, and who had the rare gift of listening without immediately trying to fix anything. I told her everything. She listened for an hour and then said simply, "What do you need right now?" "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "Then you don't have to know yet," she said. I went to the Abercorn Street house the following day, my house now, though the words still felt strange. I walked through every room slowly. Eleanor's reading chair by the window in the front parlor, the angle of it positioned to catch the afternoon light exactly right. The kitchen where she had made biscuits every Sunday morning without fail for as long as I could remember. The back garden she had tended for 60 years, still holding its late autumn color. I sat in her reading chair for a long time. I thought about 34 years of photographs sent quietly to Portland. 34 years of a bridge being built one plank at a time by a woman who understood that some things cannot be rushed, only prepared for. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number Howard had sent me. It rang 3 times. Then a voice, careful, slightly uncertain. "The The voice of a man who has been waiting for a call for a very long time and is not entirely sure he believes it is actually coming. "Hello." "James," I said. "This is Claire." A silence. Not empty, full. The specific fullness of a silence that contains 34 years of things unsaid finally finding the space they needed.
"Claire," he said.
Very quietly. Just my name, the way Eleanor had always said it, like it meant something. "I read your letter," I said. "I wasn't sure," he stopped. Started again. "I wasn't sure you would call." "I wasn't sure either," I said honestly. "But I'm calling." Another silence. Shorter this time. "How are you?" he said. And the simplicity of it, the ordinary human question asked in an entirely unordinary moment, was so precisely right that I almost laughed. "I'm figuring that out," I said. "You?" "The same," he said. "Exactly the same." James flew to Savannah 6 weeks later. We met for the first time at a coffee shop on Jones Street, neutral ground, public space, both of us understanding instinctively that the first meeting needed room to breathe without the weight of a house full of history pressing down on it. He was tall, with dark hair going silver at the temples and the slightly paint-stained hands of someone who works with color regularly. He stood up when I walked in, and we looked at each other across the coffee shop for a moment. This specific, unrepeatable moment of two people meeting for the first time, who are not strangers. I had his eyes.
He was right about that.
We talked for 4 hours. Not about Richard or Patricia or Derek. Not yet. There would be time for all of that eventually. We talked about Anna, my mother, whom he described with the love of someone who has preserved a person carefully inside memory for 30 years. We talked about Portland and Savannah and the particular experience of loving a place enough to stay. We talked about art. He had looked at my architectural work online and had specific, intelligent things to say about it, which I found unexpectedly moving. At the end of the afternoon, he walked me to my car. We stood on the sidewalk in the December light, and neither of us was quite sure how to end the first meeting of a relationship that had no template. He put out his hand, formal, careful, giving me the choice of what to do with it. I looked at his hand for a moment. Then I stepped forward and hugged him, briefly, firmly, the hug of two people who are at the very beginning of something they don't have a name for yet, but are willing to try. He held on for just a moment longer than I expected. When we stepped back, he looked at me with Eleanor's eyes. I saw it clearly for the first time, the family resemblance I had never been able to place, and said, "She was right about you." "She was right about most things," I said. He smiled. "Yes," he said.
"She really was."
Richard called me 2 weeks after the Thursday meeting. I answered because I had decided after considerable thought that I was not going to spend energy on avoidance. Avoidance requires sustained effort that I preferred to direct elsewhere. He was subdued in a way I had never heard from him, the specific subdued quality of a man who has had 2 weeks to sit alone with what he participated in and has not found a comfortable position. "I want to say something," he said. "And I'm not asking for anything in return. I just need to say it." "Go ahead," I said. "What we did to James," he said. "What we did to you. I told myself for 30 years it was the right decision. That you were better off. That James wasn't equipped." A pause. I think I knew that wasn't true. I think I knew fairly early. I just didn't want to undo something that was already done. I listened. "I'm sorry, Claire," he said. "For all of it. For 30 years of making you feel like you didn't belong. That was wrong. You belonged. You always belonged." The words landed in a complicated place, not quite healing, not quite sufficient, but real. Genuinely, unmistakably real. And from Richard, who had spent 61 years treating authenticity as a vulnerability, real was something. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "And I meant it. We were not going to be close." I understood that, and I think he did too. But we were not going to be enemies either, and for a family that had spent 30 years in a cold war of polite exclusion, that felt like meaningful progress. The Abercorn Street house takes some getting used to. It is larger than I need, which I am slowly solving by using all of it deliberately. The front parlor that gets the afternoon light, the back garden that I am learning to tend the way Eleanor tended it, the reading room on the second floor where her books still occupy the shelves exactly as she left them. I have not moved her books. I don't think I will for a while. James is coming back in the spring. We have talked on the phone every Sunday since December, not always for long, not always about anything significant. Just the ordinary accumulation of two people learning each other's rhythms. He told me last week that Harlow, his arthritic dog, has discovered a new enthusiasm for lying in sunlit patches of floor that he finds deeply relatable. I told him the back garden would have good sunlight in April. He said Harlow would appreciate that. It is not a complete thing yet, whatever James and I are building. It is early and careful and full of the particular tenderness of something that has been a long time coming and does not want to be rushed now that it has finally arrived. But it is real. And it is mine. Eleanor gave me that. She gave me the house, the truth, the bridge to a father I didn't know I had. She gave me the morning in that conference room where 30 years of being made to feel like a guest in my own family was permanently and publicly corrected. But more than any of that, more than the $4.7 million, more than the Abercorn Street property, more than Richard's dollar and Patricia's pearls and Derek's recovered debt, she gave me this. The knowledge that I had always been chosen. Not conditionally. Not temporarily. Completely, deliberately from the very beginning. By the one person in that family whose opinion, it turns out, was the only one that ever mattered. I sat in her reading chair last Sunday evening as the light went gold over the garden and thought about that. Then I picked up the phone and called James. He answered on the second ring.
Hey, he said. Hey, I said.
And we talked until the garden went dark.